Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chair, we believe that independence would be beneficial to Scotland. By beneficial, we mean more democratic. This improves Scotland politically, culturally, and its standing abroad. Scotland is a great nation with a lot to offer. We have a voice, so let's use it. Independence gives us an opportunity to focus on things which we care most about, the things which affect us. In a few years to come, I can see a new and improved Scotland having control over the welfare of its own people. My first point is that Scotland would be more democratic. One of the major issues with the Union is Trident. Britain's nuclear weapons are located in Scotland, despite a majority of Scottish MPs voting against it. We don't want to live in an unjust society where we spend £100 billion for deadly weapons which are designed to put innocent people at risk. Yet we have no choice. It is as if we were the nuclear dump of Europe. An astonishing half of the government since World War II were not voted by us, ladies and gentlemen. For example, Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron were not elected by the people of Scotland, although they have had a major impact on us. Others may argue that this is the same with many constituencies in England, but we are a separate parliament with a separate culture. Political opinions in Scotland are frequently different from the ones in England. Margaret Thatcher was the former Prime Minister who introduced the poll tax. The majority of Scottish citizens didn't vote for her, therefore they didn't approve of her or her policies. Once again, the opinions of the Scottish people were suppressed, and will continue to be suppressed until we gain independence. Elections are an important part of a democracy, and we believe that Scotland has a much more democratic structure compared to Westminster. Half of Westminster, the House of Lords, aren't elected at all. Also, Westminster uses the first-past-the-post electoral system. This unjust system allows most people's opinions to be ignored. 59 Scottish MPs were elected using first-past-the-post, meaning that most of our votes were just wasted. I just don't understand why we are forced to obey such a partisan parliament. However, Scotland uses the additional member system, or in other words, a form of proportional representation. We can clearly see that independence would be beneficial to Scotland, as our parliament structure ensures that our views are counted and not trampled upon. My second point is about Scotland's economy. There have been scaremongering stories about independent Scotland, ladies and gentlemen. These stories have been deliberately exaggerated in order to frighten the population into voting no. For example, some may argue that companies will leave Scotland. We would rebut that for every company we lose from not being part of the UK, we would gain others by cutting off corporation tax. Another example of a weak... Yes, please?
There's no point having a lower corporation tax if you don't have any customers.
Well, I don't want to let too much away, but my partner will go on to talk about international reputations and how Scotland would attract more tourists. Another example of a weak argument is that we would lose the pound. In reply, I would say, so what? We could easily just vote for another currency, as we will be an independent democracy. A substantive case about independence is the oil revenue. Some say that the oil will run out, but they clearly don't understand the value of money, ladies and gentlemen. Right now we receive £8.4 billion from the oil revenue, and we will continue to do so for up to 40 years. We believe that the road to independence will be a smooth journey all the way through, with maybe a few twists and turns, but no hidden dips. The truth is that an independent Scotland will only be in a slightly altered economic situation. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, independence won't affect our economy, but will allow us to gain a true democracy, helping our nation prosper and flourish. An independent Scotland would walk away from an alienated, centralised democracy and slowly transform into a vibrant, participative one, meaning that by 2025, independence would clearly be beneficial to Scotland. My partner will go on to talk about international relations and reputations, and about how Scotland would be more tolerant. For all the points I have raised today, I urge you to propose the proposition. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, judges, today we are looking at the mind-boggling minefield that is the referendum. I know the idea of an independent Scotland is a nice dream. We could run around the hills in kilts, drinking iron brew all day, but this is reality. And Scottish independence is just not a beneficial route for Scotland to take at the moment, as my colleagues James and Peter will prove to you today. I will be talking about the vast subject about economics, touching on the business and personal aspects of it all. But first, I would like to start off with some rebuttal. My partner James will go on to talk a bit more about Trident and tell you a bit more about that. Also, you talked about how we've got a parliament structure and how we need to be an independent country so that we have got a better democracy. But the fact is, our parliament is great and it's running what it needs to run. We're in a union where we can have a good amount of money and we have a safety net. Also, you talked about dropping the pound. Now, this will cost a lot of money to enforce and a lot of money that I don't think we have. But I will go on to that later. But first, let's talk about businesses. I'm going to talk about banks mainly because our banks have £750 billion of pensions and investments. And from the 40 million account holders, 9 out of 10 of them are English. Now, an English customer would be wary to bank with a Scottish bank. As Tom McPhail, who's head of pensions research at Hargreaves Lasden, put it, if you're living in England, you wouldn't buy a pension from a French-based company based in France. So why would you invest your savings in Scotland if it has a different currency, a different set of rules, and a wholly different jurisdiction?
Point of information.
Yes.
You've talked about English companies, but there are other countries in the world.
Well, I talked about how 9 out of 10 of the customers are English, and if Scotland becomes an independent nation, then lots of the English customers would be scared about what that will do with their savings and their money. So we'll probably move away to another English bank. Now, believe it or not, banks are sometimes smart. I think most banks would be clever enough to move with their customers, which will have a detrimental effect on Scotland. We will lose our money, our skilled workers, and our links. Now, if we lose our links, Scotland will become more and more dependent on itself. We would have our money being circulated, and we wouldn't have our money being boosted. We need to have our predominant banks so that other countries can recognise us and trust us so that we could increase our income. Also, if we lose our skilled workers, we lose our Scottish industry. We need these people to bring their much-needed knowledge and skill into Scotland, which brings in more money to Scotland. No, thank you. Not only the lack of jobs will in all the banks and companies that have left will be gone, but it would also leave a lot of young people who will be left unemployed and untrained by our very key skilled men and women. We also need more money from the corporation tax. We need the money from the corporation tax in order to help other people. If we don't have these things, then we are out of pocket. We have a higher percentage of unemployed people who will rely on benefits, which we can't give them as we are lacking in money because we don't have any industry. It's a downward spiral, ladies and gentlemen, and a spiral that I'm not sure we can get out of. I'm going to go on to my second point, which is education and universities. Now, at the moment, we get a free education from nursery to university. In university, the Scottish and the EU students can learn free of charge, and it's the English students that have to pay. Now, if we do become part of the EU, we need to treat all of the members fairly, which means, unfortunately, England as well. This means that the universities will expect between 20,000 and 90,000 more students from England, which means that is a lot more places being used up. So a lot of the Scottish students either won't get a place in a preferred university, or they might end up having to go to England or another country where they'd have to pay for their tuition fees. Now, my main question is, how are we going to pay for all these new students coming in to the universities? We already have to pay off the national debt. We have to pay for becoming independent, our EU funds, and now also this. I'm not sure where we're going to get all the money from, especially as the oil is going to run out. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have talked to you about the economics of it all, and hopefully how I've explained how if we're paying more into the Scottish economy, we're getting less out of it, which will not be beneficial to the people of Scotland. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair. 2025, a year by which many things will have occurred. For one thing, my debating coach, Mr. McPake, will have finally become completely bald. Prince William will be King William. Niall Horan will have received a Nobel Prize for discovering the cure to cancer, and I will have become the next Emily Sandé, singer and doctor. But the most important thing that will have occurred is that we will have realised that independence is beneficial to Scotland. Today, I'll be going over 2 main points. The first being Scotland having better international relations and a reputation. My second point is about Scotland being more tolerant, but first I would like to rebut some of the points the opposition have made. Ms Bagarni talked about economics, but I think you'll find that the economics won't change very much, give or take £100. Independence is beneficial, and I'll explain this later on in my speech. And how is the Parliament in London running if we don't get a say? We won't lose skilled workers, we'll gain them, which I will explain again later on in my speech. And you were saying that the oil will run out. We have, I think it's the Capital Fund, and what we're doing is we're going to put the oil in a bank, which means that it will actually end up getting even more money. And you're defending England, but this is about Scotland. No, thank you. Now on to my first point. Scotland would have better international relations and a far better reputation. What I mean by this is our allies and how much influence we have. If we do become independent, we can form alliances with smaller, stronger countries, such as Scandinavia, whilst keeping alliances which we had when we were part of Britain, such as America. What I don't understand, ladies and gentlemen, is why people believe if we become independent, we will be severing any relation with Britain. We on side proposition see Britain and Scotland as close friends, who perhaps share a flat. If your flatmate was moving on to something that would be beneficial to them, would you stop speaking to them and being friends? No, you wouldn't. You would help them and support them. No, thank you. Also, we have far more influence in the EU if we were we would have far more influence in the EU if we were an independent country. Look at Denmark. It's exactly the same as Scotland, but it has far more influence in us. Why? Because Denmark is an independent country, and we aren't. The opposition may suggest that we would have more influence if we stayed with Britain, but I'd like to remind them that whilst Britain has a larger voice, it's extremely brittle. Wouldn't you rather be part of a smaller voice, but a more compassionate one? We'd also earn a far better reputation if we were to become independent. Right now, we're just the northern part of Britain where the Queen comes for her holidays. No one knows we exist. Remember when Andy Murray won Wimbledon and a newspaper wrote he was English? England didn't say anything, but when the opposite happened with a rugby player, England was fuming. I'd like to tell a story, ladies and gentlemen, of my family in India. Well, what happened was we went over to my granny's place, and then my granny, she was kind of losing her memory. So my mum went over and she said, "Hello, Granny, how are you?" And my gran said, "Yes, I'm fine. Where do you live again?" And then my mum went, "Oh, well, we live in England. We live in London." And then my granny went, "Ah." I asked my mum later, "Why did you say we lived in England? We don't live in England. We live in Scotland." My mum said, "Oh, because nobody really knows about Scotland. I mean, I thought they'd understand better if we said England." This is what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. No one knows we exist. As an independent Scotland, we would become the shining stars of the planet. We, as a proud nation of Scots, need to make a name for ourselves. Now on to my second point, Scotland being more tolerant. In Scotland, we have very different views to England. We want more immigrants but can't get any, but whilst they don't want any immigrants. In Scotland, we have an enlightened attitude to immigrants. Across Europe, no one wants immigration. And whilst UKIP and the National Front of France are getting more and more votes, Scotland's white paper says that they want more immigrants, not less. Scotland recognises the skills foreign students bring. Foreign students' skills will make the economy better, as we will encourage them to stay and start working here after their degree. In this way, Scotland will prosper and develop. England also has a different attitude to women than ours. We are trying to encourage women to start working by having women looked after by the childcare scheme. Women tend to prioritise their children before work and are held back from working because of the expectation that women shouldn't work. The childcare scheme would take care of that. Scotland is one of the most educated countries on the planet, and most of those educated people are women. The majority of Scots are women. How will we prosper if this majority aren't working? We want more women in this parliament. Less than 20% of Westminster has women. They need women, and the Shouty Boys Club proves this. Holyrood, on the other hand, has 40% women, including 2 major party leaders. What society will women advance in? One where they're represented, or one that they're not represented? To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, if we become independent, we will have a better international relation and a better reputation. We will also be more tolerant. With these benefits, we as an independent Scotland would thrive. Let's not be the northern part of Britain. Let's be Scotland. For the reasons me and my partner have given you, I urge you to vote proposition.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Chair, Judges. Today we are here to discuss the motion. This House believes that in 2025 it will be clear that independence is beneficial for the majority of Scots. We as the opposition believe that it will not. My partner Sarah has discussed the economy. I shall discuss defence, and my partner Peter shall discuss the EU. Before I engage in my points, I'd like to begin with some rebuttal. I believe the first speaker spoke about a new currency. But would our new currency be attractive to other trading countries without the assurance of a financial background? Also, it would hinder trade because other countries would have to pay for exchange rates, which are already expensive as they are. You spoke about oil, which fluctuates in price, which means that our oil would, A, it will run out, and B, it would be less worth at more points. And when you spoke about less customers, we meant that there's a large population in England, which means that a country will profit more in England because there are simply more customers to sell to. Okay, but on to my first point. A depleted military. We could not expect to receive Scottish regiments and military assets. The UK and Scots military is so entangled that the military would have to be reconstructed, and this would result in major redundancies, which is obviously not good for Scotland. Now, what would be the problem with a depleted military? Well, for instance, by the end of this year, the Ministry of Defence will have had yet another defence cut, which will have left us with 1 Air Force, 1 naval base and 1 army base, which is left in Scotland. After a depleted military, who will be left to run these, ladies and gentlemen? With a depleted Air Force, a depleted naval force and a depleted army, who will be left to run these bases if there's anyone left to run them at all? And with such depleted military, with such depleted military assets, what will the result be? A new and forming country will have fishing waters, oil fields, and new undisputed mineral fields in Arctic waters, in Arctic ice. Now, fishing and oil are some of our 2 main incomes, and if they're in dispute from another country, then that's our income coming away. So countries such as Russia can easily dispute our territories, our national security. If we don't have that security, we would not have a chance to expand. Yes, please.
Nobody would want to bomb us because they don't have any reason to bomb us. They have reason to bomb Britain because Britain has bombed so many people and they've been so inhuman towards other countries. If we became independent, we would abolish all nuclear weapons. They would have no reason to bomb us.
Okay, I'm going to come on to nuclear weapons. And no, I'm saying that because we would have this new valuable material and assets, this would come under dispute because this would be seen as an attractive measure for another country, and it wouldn't be about revenge. No, thank you. And we would have less of a chance to negotiate, being the weaker, less influential new country. I shall now move. No, thank you. I shall now move on to NATO. NATO, a traditionally pro-nuclear organisation and founded nuclear organisation, will not allow us to join while we have territorial disputes over Trident and territorial border security disputes. Now, if we do not join NATO, we will not have a place at the high table. Our voice will be cut. Yes, you did say that it would be a compassionate voice, but a smaller voice will not be heard in the world market. So if we would have to keep, we would essentially have to keep Trident to, we would essentially have to come to an agreement over Trident, which would not happen under the SNP. No, thank you. And because we would have to, essentially, we'd probably have to keep the Trident, we wouldn't be able to afford the £20 billion renewal of Trident, which would be needed. And as being the smaller, weaker country, we would not be able to do this. Also, we would, if we were, now it would be wonderful if we could join Trident, but obviously we can't because of the issues with Trident and territorial border security. We could have alliances with 20 of the most economically buoyant and powerful countries. We could protect our assets. We could get more of an influential place in the world. But we wouldn't have a chance at a high table anyway because we have these disputes over Trident. And not being in NATO would distance ourselves from other countries, which would put us in a lesser advantage being that weaker country. Right, my final point, intelligence and cyber security. The intelligence, the UK-based privileged relationship with other countries involves information sharing, and we would not have none of this because we would not have these alliances, and cyber security would take years and millions of pounds to form, and we would not be able to share our current cyber security with the UK. I hope you support our side. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, judges, Mr. Chair. By the year 2025, I reckon that Harry Styles will be the Prime Minister, Justin Bieber will have finally retired officially, and I will be the next Susan Boyle, and I will be damn proud of that. My point of clashes that I have noticed during this debate have been democracy, the economics, and Trident. Starting off with democracy. I don't think anyone knows that, but 85% of Scots did not vote for a majority of the Prime Ministers after World War II. These are including Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron. Margaret Thatcher was not a benefit for Scotland itself, closing all the coal mines, increasing the poll tax, and it was basically a nightmare for Scotland from the years she started till the years she finished. So the economics that have been mentioned the most have been oil, and have been mainly oil. £8.4 billion will be going into our capital fund every single year we become independent. We will have more money than anywhere else. Look at Denmark. Look how. No, thank you. Look how they have shined during independence. Look how much money they have. They are a rich country that they can afford to pay for anyone, anywhere in the world, for all their expenses for university, also granting them £200 for living sprees every single year. Say if I wanted to go to Harvard and I lived in Denmark, they would pay for that every single year until I graduated. So the last thing I'm going to make is about the nuclear weapons and Trident. We say that in the Faslane down in Glasgow will be removed within the first 5 years of independence if we do succeed in this. We will see that we will be a peaceful country without the Trident, and we will also see that no one will want to bother us anymore. Because I'm not saying this will, but if it does, if World War III suddenly breaks out, who's going to get attacked first? The people with nuclear weapons, and that is Scotland. Everything.
Nuclear weapons would act as a deterrent, which would mean that we'd be less likely to be attacked. So if I had 10,000 soldiers and you had 2,000 soldiers and a nuclear weapon, you would be less likely to be attacked because people would be more scared of you.
Thank you. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we do get attacked, 90-mile radius would be destroyed if they did go off. That would mean Edinburgh. That would be as far up as almost Aberdeen. The only things that would be safe would probably be the Shetland Islands, Inverness, and John O'Groats up top Scotland. So I want to make more points about economics. The most recent national accounts for Scotland show that our national finances are in a healthier condition than the rest of the UK, which means we have more money from the rest of the UK, and we are still not given a chance to shine this. No, thank you. We were also making a point about oil, saying that we will continue to achieve oil and gas well into 2000. No, thank you. well into 2055, and new oil spurts and gas spurts are still being found almost every day, and 10% of all that money will again be going into our capital fund. So, to conclude, we've talked about the democracy side, the economics, and the trident. Democracy is a big thing in Scotland, and we would like to continue that. Economics and money have been always discussed, that we will probably be a richer country. We'll probably more likely stay the same economically. And with the nuclear and tridents, our weapons, if we do come in, will be removed, and we will obviously be a safer country. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I urge you to propose the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Proposition, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to sum up the side opposition's case on the motion, this House believes by the year 2025 it will be clear that independence is beneficial to the majority of Scots. But before I do that, I'd like to start with some rebuttal. The previous speaker talked at great length about oil, and that an independent Scotland would be oil rich, and this would be a key asset to our economy. But I say, and the side opposition says, we can't have an economy based on a hugely volatile priced commodity. The price of oil goes up and down all the time, and we can't have the guarantee that the price of oil in the North Sea will be valuable enough to base our entire economy on. Before I get on to the substantive points of clash, I'd like to introduce a new point to this debate, which has not been covered so far, and that is Europe. The European Union has been vital for the last 40 years to the UK's economic interests. But Scotland is not actually a member of the EU. And this is a sort of myth which has been put out by the SNP recently. Hang on, Scotland's a member. No, it's not. Scottish citizens benefit hugely from being EU citizens, and Scottish businesses can sell across the single market, but Scotland is not an independent EU country. And it is clear, if one part of a member state breaks away from that member state, it leaves the Union. So, if we become independent, we leave the European Union. And can we get back in? This is the key question. And it's been answered, I think, by the President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for Scotland to get into the EU. And I'd like to quote from Andrew Rawnsley in the Observer earlier this month, when describing the EU. It has emerged from the planet's most volatile continent and evolved into a voluntary organisation of 20 democratic states. No, thank you. The most outstanding example of soft power in world history. It is vital for Scotland to get into the EU, and it's vital that we remain part of the EU, and we can only do that by staying with Britain, voting no to independence. No, thank you, because it would be very, very hard to get into this thing. It takes many, many years. And this is my final point on Europe, a crucial point. Only the UK and Denmark has opted out to the euro single currency. And any new member state of the European Union would have to join the euro. We are giving away a large part of our independence to Brussels. They can set our interest rates and so on. No, thank you. Giving our economy up to Germany. I don't want that, and neither do the Scottish people. I'd like to get onto the points of clash. The first speaker talked about democracy and Trident. Trident was a threat to democracy. But what does democracy mean? Democracy means different things to everyone. It's a buzzword. We just mentioned democracy, democracy. What does it mean? It means different things to Donald Gorrie as a Liberal Democrat, but it might mean a different thing to Nigel Farage as a Conservative anti-EU politician. I say that we do live in a democracy, and don't let anyone tell you that somehow the EU is the UK is some sort of dictatorship. No, thank you. The UK government is elected by the British people. They win the support of the British people at an election. And you mentioned the Tories and all the rest of it, that they only have one MP in Scotland is a well-known fact. But that's irrelevant. They've won the British election, so they're now the British government. She talked about the economy, and she said that yes, companies would leave, but new ones would start off. It's all fine. But this is part of the relaxed, blasé attitude of the yes side and they're saying, well, who cares to say RBS or Standard Life go? Well, who's going to replace them? These are big employers, right? In Edinburgh, at Gogarburn, big employer RBS. What about the defence jobs? What's going to happen to these defence contracts in independent Scotland? And I think the key part of the economic side is we would lose the UK pound. This is vital, a very reliable, very strong currency. Who's going to pay for it then? An independent Scotland currency. What's it going to be called? Who's going to pay for it? Are you going to pay for it as taxpayers? Really? A new currency? I remember at the height of the euro crisis, economists would say Greece is going to leave the euro. Thank you. Italy will leave the euro. But who's going to pay for it? No one would pay for it. So guess what? Greece is still a member of the euro. On a second point on international relations and tolerance, she mentioned women. Women, there have been one woman Prime Minister, never a woman First Minister of Scotland, and that is Margaret Thatcher, who went further than any woman has ever gone before in our land and reached the highest offices of state. So the fact that women don't get on in the UK is irrelevant. I would like to finish my speech by saying I profoundly disagree with independence. It would not be beneficial to the majority of Scots, and I hope you oppose this motion. Thank you very much.